saying thank you so much for making such an important film. This is a film that I think a lot of cinema lovers out there are going to absolutely fall in love with, and it's such an important film to have been made, so congratulations.
Thank you. I hope so, yes. I hope it's a nostalgic ride for a lot of people and an eye-opener for many others.
So, Rob, tell us a little bit about where the journey first started for you with Splice Here. Where did the idea first originate?
Well, I guess it started about 10 years ago. As you know, this project's been going on for 10 years. This is the first decade of digital projection. So as a projectionist back then, I just kind of saw that everything was changing very quickly. You'd show up for work one day and a projector would be gone and there'd be this, digital box sitting there. And so as a filmmaker and a projectionist, I thought, who's the best person to try and capture what we're losing? And, I thought, okay, well, it's got to be me. So I literally just grabbed a camera and started recording everything that was happening. And I didn't know what it was going to be back then, probably just a short film. And as time went on and more aspects of film survival and the whole scenario kind of evolved, and the more things I wanted to include, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and turned into this massive 2-hour epic.
Yeah. Even as a film journalist, I saw the change happen from a different perspective. We, of course, had the Toorak Theaterette here in Melbourne, which had been used for years and years for media screenings, and suddenly one day we couldn't use it anymore because the films coming out were all digital, and that only had an older projection. And within, I think, 3 years of us stopping going there, the place was demolished. The guy that ran it was no longer had an income, and the theatre was demolished because he had to sell it. We also saw the Paramount Theatre here in Melbourne, where Paramount had all of their media screenings suddenly not being able to be used. That change happened so quickly. Was there any warning that it was going to happen at all?
Yeah, there was. I mean, we all knew it was coming as projectionists. As far back as the 90s, people knew it was coming. But when it did happen, it was pretty ruthless, and pretty fast.
Yeah.
In terms of cinemas that exhibitors were promised. Well, not promised, but they were told, you've got this new system which won't need a projectionist. You won't have to ferry film in and out of here. It'll just come in on hard drives. And I think that was a really appealing incentive for the cinemas. And so they jumped on the bandwagon very quickly. And the studios were very clever in that they set up an incentive scheme in that first 12 months to subsidise cinemas for buying the equipment to get them started with digital. And that helped a lot of people set up. But of course, digital projector is essentially a computer. In the computer world, we all know how you're on the mouse wheel and you've got to keep up with software updates and hardware updates. And if you don't, you get left behind and you can't play your media anymore. So we're on our third generation of projectors already.
The story that I just told you about the Toorak Theaterette, where it basically it was demolished within 3 years of reviewers stopping going there. Is that something that we've seen around the world, that some theatres haven't survived this transition?
Certainly, yeah. A lot of places just couldn't even adopt the digital projection systems with that incentive program, or they did do the change and found that it was too hard to keep up with it.
Yeah.
Just to keep the equipment up. A lot of projectionists didn't make the transition. Some did. Some with a computer background as well, carried across. But of course, we didn't need as many people to run the systems. It's essentially just a farm of media. It sits down the back. Somebody will come in once a week and program all the films, and then the cinemas just run themselves for the rest of the week. So, but that means you get I mean, I don't want to get bogged down in all the differences between arguments between film and digital and the aesthetics of how they look. But I will say that a lot of digital cinema means that because people think it doesn't need to be attended, you don't get ports being cleaned. That's the glass between the projection booth and the cinema. And so that gets grubby very, very quickly because you need air conditioners in the buyer boxes to keep the equipment cool. That creates a dirty film on the glass very quickly. Lots of things like that. And we've lost we don't have curtains in a lot of the newer cinemas. We don't have masking. The whole sort of feeling of presentation has been lost.
Yeah. So for those who haven't had the chance to sit down and watch the film, tell us a little bit about what you explore with the film and what kind of people you go and talk to.
Well, it's kind of a personal journey through that first decade that I've just been talking about. And along the way, I'm trying to find out, has film survived and why it should survive, really. So we've been to the UK, we've been to the US, we've spoken to people like Quentin Tarantino, Douglas Trumbull. It's probably his last interview before he died, actually. Leonard Maltin, and a lot of film historians, film archivists, projectionists. But it's essentially an adventure through film and my own life in film and how I experienced it, how I grew up with it, and where we are now.
What was that like as a journey for you to put your own story on screen? How did that feel for you having to do that?
It was very confronting, but kind of a necessity.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years in, we sort of realised that we needed a storyteller to tie all of this together, and the obvious person was me. So the first time in my 30-year career as a filmmaker, I had to get in front of the camera. And the more of that we did, the more I realised I could actually use my own life as a vehicle for exploring all these different parts of film preservation and film appreciation.
Yeah. And as a film lover, what was that experience like, getting to sit down and talk to people like Quentin Tarantino?
Oh, it was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the whole third act adventure is meeting Quentin, and that was kind of a whole collision of events and situations coming together in the right way. But it was amazing. And meeting Douglas Trumbull, who, for those of you who don't know, is the man behind the special effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey, Blade Runner, a Star Trek the motion picture. He's always been a luminary in the film world, and it was great to meet him.
Yeah. Without giving away any major points of the documentary, what was the one thing that you learnt while you were putting together this documentary that you didn't know before you went into it?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably some of the mechanics of filmmaking, but I suppose I don't want to get into that. It's more about what did I learn about the film world.
Yeah.
I think I learned just the extent of how collectors and the projectionist underground and all these people that were collecting things over the years, they weren't just kind of nostalgically collecting things. They've actually saved a lot of films.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of films have actually survived, or we have them today, or we have the restorations because of the stash that somebody had stuck under their bed back when they used to work in the cinema.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be the only surviving print.
Well, mate, these Q&As that you're doing too, these look absolutely exciting. You're going to some of the most beautiful cinemas around, including a cinema here in Melbourne, the Astor, where my uncle was the projectionist for a number of years. So,
oh, really?
So, yeah, how do you feel about doing these Q&As in some of the Australia's most beautiful theatres?
Oh, it's a dream come true. It's just to have screenings there. I mean, but that's kind of where this film belongs, I think, because it is about, there's a lot about the Picture Palace era, about the old way that we used to see films and seeing film prints, and these are the places where you can still experience that. So, I worked at the Astor briefly, and I've had a long association with that place, as well as the Sun and the Nova, and here in Melbourne, and I'm showing my film at all those places, plus the Classic and the Lido, and going up to Sydney. The Orpheum is just gorgeous, of course, and the Ritz in Renwick. It's just wonderful.
Definitely. Well, Rob, to finish off, what would you like to say to people out there who are thinking about heading along to see the film, and what would you like them to take away from the film as well?
I think what I have noticed with the people that have seen it so far is you don't need to be a film buff. I mean, when you say the word documentary, people kind of have an idea of a whole heap of very crusty talking heads just ambling along for ages, but it's so much more than that. It really is an adventure, and it's told in that way. And people who are not film buffs have come out and gone, I really enjoyed that. That was such a great ride. And I learned so much. And the thing they say last is I learned so much. And I find that very heartening, because it means they had a great time and they learned something. So it really is a fun, it's a love letter to film.